said Islam is in fact a religion of peace, and if you disagree, we will literally cook you.
She thought she was being funny. I think she meant what she said, and I think she didn't quite understand how it really disproved her point. That same mob outside had actually blocked the entrances.
Why is the West right to be suspicious of Islam?
The attitude towards non-Muslims is extremely problematic. They carry those attacks in the name of Islam.
Why hasn't the UK government banned the Muslim Brotherhood?
So we're going to be responding to a podcast hosted by Shabbos Kestenbaum on PragerU with special guest Jonathan Sacerdoti, a British writer, podcast host, speaker, proud Jew, proud Zionist. Both gentlemen are staunchly pro-Israel voices, some of the most well-known. Jonathan Sacerdoti is located in England. He recently gave a speech at Oxford when they hosted a debate between Muslims and, well, not just Muslims, but pro-Muslim voices versus voices that aren't necessarily against Islam, but who question Islam. And the subject of the debate was, should the West be suspicious of Islam? So it was very interesting. You can go check it out by just going to Oxford's YouTube channel. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel, leave your comments, follow me at Rafi the Realtor on Instagram for your South Florida real estate needs. And you can support my channel by going to the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. Let's get into it.
And welcome back to The Brief. We have a great show for you. But just before we begin, make sure you like, comment, subscribe to ensure that we can reach as large of an audience as possible. And with that, we're joined today by Jonathan Sacerdoti. He is a British broadcaster, journalist, public intellectual. Jonathan, appreciate you making the time.
Great to be with you, Shabbos.
So I want to get straight into it. Oxford Union debate, which has since blown up, gone super viral. The Oxford Union itself is often known as the last bastion of free speech, but the debate that you took part in recently was actually not a debate you took part in recently. It took place many months ago. So can you just educate myself and educate our viewers, why did it take so long for us to find out about this debate? Why did it take so long for the Oxford Union to even release the footage publicly?
Right. Well, I've done a couple of debates at the Oxford Union in the last 2 years, actually. So one was about Israel, and that was about a year and a half ago, and I got massively abused in that by the hand-picked audience.
Excuse me. The speaker is entitled to be heard in silence and to be...
No, they're cursing. It's different.
The courtesy of the
They're
House.
cursing.
I order the member is abusing the forms of the House.
That went hugely viral. 13 million people watched the abuse. And so I was surprised that they did invite me back about a year and a half later. And that was to talk about Islam. And the motion for debate was whether the West should be suspicious of Islam. We actually did the debate back in June. They said that the video would be out within a couple of weeks. And it wasn't after 6 weeks when they started to leak clips of it to Middle East Eye, who started to edit it rather selectively. And at that point, we decided that the videos that we had taken in the debate really ought to be released so that people could see the whole thing properly. And what do you know, within a few hours of doing that, the Oxford Union managed to find the upload button. So that worldwide audience who will then discuss the topic properly.
And in that sense, of course, mission accomplished. I do want to get to your thesis, which is that the West should be suspicious of Islam. But just before I get into it, I want to play perhaps the most viral clip from that debate and then get your reaction to it.
Stephen Yaxley Lennon, known to his hooligans as Tommy Robinson. Stephen, there is a crowd outside rioting against you tonight, and without the protection and generosity of a Muslim Palestinian president and a mostly South Asian executive committee, you would be quite literally cooked.
So, Jonathan, that was your ideological opposition, essentially arguing that Islam is, in fact, a religion of peace, and if you disagree, we will literally cook you. Your reaction to her claim?
Well, I mean, that's why that clip has gone, quite so viral, because that girl there, Aisha, was saying effectively, that if it weren't for the generosity and protection of the mostly Muslim committee who have hosted you here, these rioters outside would be attacking you. And it's true, there were rioters outside. There were people who didn't want this debate to go on, partly because it was about Islam and partly because one of the other speakers was Tommy Robinson, who is a controversial figure who has been an activist against Islam for many, many years. And so I think that she thought she was being funny. And I do feel a little bit sorry for Aisha there, because of all of them, actually in chatting before and after the event to all of them, she was actually quite a sweet girl. She, her parents actually hadn't been able to get into the debate to see her speak because that same mob outside had actually blocked the entrances. And so the audience was much smaller than it would normally have been. For a debate like that, it probably would have been rammed full most of the time, like the last time I was there for the Israel debate. And so I did feel a bit sorry for her. But then on the other hand, I think she meant what she said. And I think she didn't quite understand how it really disproved her point rather than made it.
So then let's zoom out from Oxford and talk about campuses in the UK broadly speaking. So you've had several high-profile extremists and actual terrorists. You have Omar Saeed Sheikh from the London School of Economics, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib. He was the attempted Christmas Day hijacker here in the US. He went to the University College London. And in fact, the UK government actually introduced the PREVENT strategy, which essentially required universities and colleges to actively spot signs of radicalization and stop students, particularly from the Muslim community, from moving toward violent extremism. So can you just describe to myself and to our audience here in the United States, what is it like as pertains to Islamic extremism and radicalization on UK campuses?
I think it's a really tough question because, well, firstly, it's been a few years since I was a student on campus and things have changed a bit since then. But because of my work, I do visit campuses and I do speak to students and others constantly about the things that they're going through. So it's always hard to know how bad the problem is because, when we see these encampments or the protests, they look terrible and they are terrible. But you do then think about it, how many people in the college or the university are actually taking part in that? And when there is enormous social pressure to do so, you then have to ask yourself, actually, isn't it true that most of the people, most of the student body actually don't want to get involved in this? The problem is they're not necessarily speaking out. And as you say, there are some quite severe cases of extremism within college campuses. And there are people who are what they call radicalized, though I don't like the term, it sounds far too passive, on campus. And there are problems within certain student bodies and student societies where people literally get to hear extremist or illegal speakers spreading extreme ideologies and problematic ideas, which can then indeed lead them into a life of even terrorism. So I do think that that is something which is common to the UK, as to the US, as to many other parts of the world.
So you mentioned Tommy Robinson, and full disclosure, Tommy's been on the show. He's a friend of PragerU. And one of the things that he often argues is the culpability of the mainstream media when it comes to the normalization of Islamism. And to me, that's kind of personified by the attack last week. The BBC reported, I'm going to quote directly to make sure I get this right. They said, quote, 1 dead, 16 injured at Berlin Pride event after vehicle driven into crowd. Now, of course, vehicles don't commit crimes, but Islamists do. Can you talk about the degree of culpability, if any, of the mainstream media in the UK when it comes to sort of this normalization of Islamism and almost giving radical Islamic terrorists kind of like this free pass?
Look, to my mind, the media and the BBC in particular are absolutely culpable. The BBC, why do I pick on the BBC specifically? Because the BBC is paid for by the license fee. So if you own a television or if you watch live TV or streaming services on the BBC's iPlayer, you have to pay this tax effectively. It's not a tax, but it may as well be. You have to pay over £100 per person. And that's how they're funded. And the reason for that is it's meant to be public service broadcasting. So if you ask me what a public service broadcaster should do in terms of how it covers, say, Israel or the Middle East or what's happening to Jews, it should be telling the truth despite it being non-fashionable, despite it bucking a trend, because that's exactly the point of a license fee. If you're not subject to commercial pressures, if you can't be boycotted by advertisers or pressure groups, but instead you have the ability to know that your funding is secure and you can actually dig through kind of derangement of mobs or any kind of pressure campaign that might be funded externally by Qatar or anywhere else, then you could literally tell the truth. But the BBC chooses not to do that. The BBC instead, for example, put out a documentary over the last 3 years during, since October the 7th, to put out a documentary supposedly telling the story of children in the Gaza Strip. And it turned out within 24 hours of them releasing the documentary that a friend and amazing activist David Collier revealed that the child narrator of the documentary was the son of a Hamas junior minister. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. The BBC claiming that they didn't know, despite having made this high-budget landmark documentary with the kid and having paid his family. So effectively, money from the ordinary TV viewer and license fee payer that went into the hands of a family who are connected to Hamas. That is just one example. There are so many examples. And because they continue to spread this stuff, they have, on the other hand, a reputation of reliability and that you can trust them. So people see this on the news, whether it's about Israel or whether it's just about Jews in general. And it's so warped and twisted, but people believe it and trust it because it came from the BBC, one of the most trusted news brands in the world. So I think it's very much culpable. And I think it's very much behind a lot of the spreading of this sort of stuff.
You know, this might be tangential, but I sort of seem that you're alluding to what Tommy Robinson would call this two-tier policing, which to me is sort of people in the UK are treated qualitatively different based on these immutable external characteristics. So the Jewish community versus the Muslim community, conservatives versus liberals. Do you think that the UK government is treating people differently based on their politics, based on their religion, based on their ethnicities?
So there's a lot of discussion over why some of these fashionable positions, which aren't true, get repeated and also get obeyed or sort of followed along by politicians. And one of the concerns is that there are sections of the country where the voter base is particularly allied to one idea or ideology, and that specifically in areas of high Muslim concentration population, politicians feel that they need to at least say the right things that their constituents, their voters, will find attractive. And so what that means is, even if they know, for example, that the genocide slur is outrageous against the state of Israel, if they don't say it, or if they don't call for a ceasefire during an existential war in which there are still hostages being kept by the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, but if they don't call for a ceasefire, even if it's not really a wise idea, even if it perpetuates the hostage taking and keeps people imprisoned in tunnels, well, then they will lose votes. And if they lose votes, they can't do anything in the national interest, never mind about Jews or Israel or anything else. But I would say that that's a cop-out. And politicians, like anyone else, really ought to do what is right. They ought to act with conviction. They ought to act according to reality. And I think that, as I said, with the BBC, the same applies with politicians. These things are self-perpetuating, because the more people go along with the lies, the more people go along with the twisting and the calumnies, the more these things basically are believed, and they sort of become true, even though they're not. So I think that all it needs is for people to say, we're not going to do this according to the color of your skin, or according to your ethnic background, or according to the country that you or your parents or their parents emigrated from. We're actually going to treat everyone the same. We're going to apply our laws the same. We're not going to tolerate things which go against our laws or our culture. And we're going to treat people as we all should treat each other in this country. But at the moment, that really isn't happening.
So, Jonathan, if I may, let's kind of get into the meat and potatoes, and that is your actual debate itself. Your thesis was that the West does, in fact, have a right to be suspicious of Islam. So in the most rudimentary and elementary way I can ask the question, why is the West right to be suspicious of Islam in your eyes?
Well, listen, I do think everyone should go and watch the speech, not just because it's my speech, but I was very proud of what I managed to say in that 12 or 13 minutes, because I think it's an extremely sensitive topic. I don't shy away from the fact that I'm talking about other people's religion, other people's faith, and a minority faith at that. And I'm a Jew. I recognize that often people criticizing your beliefs or your ideology can feel very scary. It can feel wrong. It can feel unfair. And yet, the reason that I will speak about Islam in such a context is actually because I'm a Jew, because I'm a Briton, because I'm a non-Muslim. And I do think that there is a problem within the entirety of Islam, that the attitude of many or some who are Muslim or who are adherents to Islam, the attitude towards non-Muslims is extremely problematic. That is not to say that's for all Muslims, and there is a debate over whether or not it is in line with the correct teachings of Islam or not. But that is what the debate was about. And so what I tried to explain in my speech was that I was going to look at this not as a true or deep analysis of what is and isn't correct Quranic interpretation. That's not my job. My job is to say, actually, as a Westerner, as a non-Muslim, as a Jewish person, here's how Islam has entered my life. Here's how Islam has entered our lives. And more often than not, that has been in a negative or traumatic or fatal way. So I would say that most people's first memory of Islam who aren't Muslim, say here in Britain, is not a very positive one. Where Islam has entered their lives, it's often been through things like the Salman Rushdie affair, where Salman Rushdie wrote the Satanic Verses, a novel for which there was a fatwa issued calling for his death by Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. And indeed, over decades, he had to have close protection all the time until eventually, something like 20 years later, he was indeed stabbed in New York at a public event and lost the use of one of his eyes. The point is that that is part of Islam. It may not be part of everyone's Islam. There are many Muslims who are disgusted by that as well. But the people who carry out those acts and numerous others, from 7/7 tube bombings to the Ariana Grande concert bombing in Manchester Arena, to the 7th of October in southern Israel, to the Twin Towers and 9/11, etc., etc., etc. All of those people, when they carried out those attacks, did so in the name of Islam. They said it. It doesn't matter whether I said it. It doesn't matter whether the opposition in that debate said that they're wrong. There is an enormous amount of extremism and terrorism and violence which is inspired by Islamic texts, Islamic teaching, and Islamic belief. And so I think that the debate is very important for non-Muslims and very important for Muslims if we're to try to find a way through that so that it isn't something that's scary to the rest of us.
And of course, the biggest group of victims of Islamic terrorist attacks are Muslims themselves.
Exactly.
You mentioned the attitudes of Muslims. I just want to quote what your co-debater, your colleague Lawrence Fox, mentioned at this debate, which is 43% of British Muslims want Sharia law imposed in the United Kingdom. 53% of British Muslims want schools to instill, quote, Muslim values. 78% of British Muslims say no publication should ever publish a picture of Muhammad. So my question to you, Jonathan, is these are cultural attitudes that objectively are incompatible with Western civilization. You know, we believe in a free press and free speech. How can this be reformed, if at all?
I don't necessarily know the answer to that question, but what I would suggest is that for countries like my own here in Great Britain,
It can't be reformed. The rules of England have to change.
and I feel very British, you know, I grew up here and it is very much a part of my identity. I think that the main thing that we're lacking is a strong sense of our own identity. I think that for most of my life, there's been this transformation of British identity from something which was very clear and rooted in our history and our traditions, and maybe even in Christianity, which was the religion of the state at one point, at any rate, if it isn't anymore. I think that slid a bit. And during the 90s, when I was a teenager, there was this move towards multiculturalism, which said that different cultures can coexist within our society without adapting and assimilating. I think for me, that was probably the biggest mistake, because what it said was that we could all live in our own little enclaves. We could even not learn the same language. We could exist in our own bubble. And that doesn't create a cohesive society. Whereas a varied society with people from all around the world in it, that's absolutely fine, even desirable, because that variety can enrich our culture and our identity. I mean, countries like Israel are just a good example of that. It is a country with vast amounts of immigration from around the world. Yes, Jewish immigration, but people from such different backgrounds and cultures. And yet there is a strong Jewish and Israeli identity, which has helped people to create a strong state with a strong sense of identity. And yet there are differences in traditions and foods and ideas and thoughts and even politics, which do draw on people's ethnic origins or people's backgrounds or what have you. I think that we're missing that in the UK. And that's why, to me, it's actually a great shame that Zionism and Israel have become such dirty words to Brits and also across much of the West, because actually I think that Zionism represents a particularly successful integration of different peoples from around the world in a way that they could have a common and shared identity without losing their connection to, let's say, the variety that they have from one another. And so
I think that's so well said. Things that I myself have said, but nonetheless, Jonathan is spot on. England needs to go back to its roots. It needs a strong Christian white English identity, and the people that live amongst them as immigrants need to abide by those laws. But it's important that Britain takes on those policies, because if they're too soft and easygoing, then countries and people, not countries, but people who come from countries that are not as accepting and free are going to impose their beliefs on a free society that's too soft to do anything about it. With that said, leave your comments, subscribe, like, and share. Follow me at Rafi the Realtor for all of your real estate needs in Miami and the greater South Florida area. And you can support the channel via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. So if you were to take a moment to go to the link, donate whatever you felt was good and fair to you, I would so greatly appreciate it. I look forward to you tuning into the next one. Until next time, peace.